Welcome back to the Elevate Your Best podcast. My name is Michael Danklefs.
And I am Bruno Martins. And today we are going to cover the 12 areas of our lives.
So the 12 areas of our lives, this is really relevant for me as we start the new year. A huge process that I've been through over the last several years is called Lifebook. The Lifebook process helps you refine and define a life vision for your life. It is the what you want to create in your life. And part of that process is breaking down your life into 12 different categories. So we're going to be talking a little bit about each of those categories this year, at least one per month, because luckily enough, there's 12 categories and 12 months of the year. So my plan is to talk about at least one of these each month so we can actually share our growth as well as our ideas around each of these categories as things move forward. So the first category the Lifebook focuses on is the one that so many of us have a lot of experience setting goals for and working towards. And so many people here now that it's the first part of the year is the big one that I hear people talking about, their health and fitness. It's the one that you can see tangible results from and you can take tangible steps towards. So that's generally where we start off with the Lifebook process, is with your health and fitness. So the idea around breaking it down into these smaller pieces is so that it's not as overwhelming. Be able to change your life.
What are the 12 areas of our lives? Like before, I believe that one of the first things we should talk about what is the Lifebook process, because the 12 areas of our lives are deeply related to the Lifebook process, and about what are the 12 areas of our lives. Okay. So you are the best one of us to introduce the Lifebook process. Can you please?
Yes, absolutely. So today we're really talking about the process of Lifebook and the 12 different categories of life. So just want to go through that list really quickly, and we will be going into a deep dive, at least on one episode a month on one of these categories as this year unfolds. So January is health and fitness, the most tangible one that most people know about setting and holding goals towards. Intellectual life, what you do with your intellect, with your brain, in what you're receiving as well as what you're creating. Third is emotional. It's how you are reacting emotionally to things and what are you doing in order to elicit the emotions you want in your life. Next is character, is what are those things, those values that you are known for that are non-negotiables. This is your character. Next is your spiritual life, your connection to a higher power, your rituals and practices to connect you with the rest of humanity, whatever that may be. All 5 of those are focused on self. Once we've really refined what we want for ourselves in those 5 categories is when we then shift into relationships. The first one being our love relationship, that partner that we're in a long-term relationship with, or maybe not, depending on what it is for your life and what your aim and what your vision of your life is. The 8th is parenting, your relationship with your children. For those without children, maybe it's actually to your nieces and nephews, or an example to kids in your community. The 8th is your social relationships, which is your extended family, as well as it is the people that are your friends that you are actually spending time with and going out of your way to actually grow deeper in those relationships. And the 9th is about finances. One of those other key things that we can make solid goals on and see tangible results. But it really is about your relationship with finances. What are you doing with the money that comes in? How are you investing that money once you have it? And this is separate from your career, what you do to earn your finances. This really is how are you contributing to the world? What value are you bringing to the world that you're going to be compensated for? The 11th category is quality of life. During the process of doing your Lifebook, this tends to be the one where you've done all of this work on the other 10 categories to really define what you want and what you need to do in order to get it. But this then is in many ways the reward that you receive in the experiences you have in your life, the environment that you have around you, and the things that actually bring you joy. Then the last category is life vision. What is the culmination of all the 11 categories all together in a narrative about what you want your life to look like. If that's actually on one particular day, or if that's actually a week or a month, or all of those things combined. Now, the Lifebook process is so much about doing this deep discovery around how to get in your life what you want, but also what do you want to be receiving, what do you want to be experiencing? How do you want your life to show up? How do you want to show up in your life? And the initial process for Lifebook is about doing this deep dive and discovering what this is. And once again, we're breaking it down into smaller pieces even inside of that. And there is a training process to go through in order to achieve that, not from a place of you have to live your life like this. It's a framework to hang what your beliefs are. What is it that you want to create in your life? Why do you specifically want to create it? And the steps that you feel you need to take in order to get there. So today is just really a summary as we're talking about this starting this year. We'll be going into more depth in each of those categories as the year unfolds.
Nice, Michael. And I like the idea of the Lifebook process because I like this idea of these visualization exercises. Like I know the 3M IQ exercise from Vishen Lakhiani, which I always relate a lot with the Lifebook process. That is also the things I do in Notion that deeply benefit from this division in areas, because if you are planning everything and you don't lose track of anything, and it is hard. I believe it's hard for everybody to keep track of 12 areas of our lives. But then when we have a tool like Notion that can help us to keep track of this information and to make sure that the ideas that we have and that the growth that we need in order to put those ideas into motion actually happens, it's very good. So it deeply relates with this exercise that I do with journaling as well. I like the idea of the Lifebook process. And it's not just me. I do know that there is a guy called Dr. Tal Ben Shahar. I believe I get to meet him through Mind Valley as well. It was an interview with, I believe was Vishen Lakhiani that was doing this interview with him. And he talks about what he calls SPIRE in his books. And those are 5 areas that he says that to be related to the human nature, which is, SPIRE is an acronym. So it's S for spiritual, P for physical, I for intellectual, R for relational, and this is talking about our personal relationships and our relationships with our peers, and then emotional. And it's interesting because indeed those are deeply related to who we are as in our nature as animals. But the Lifebook process, it covers more 7 categories that are more related to I believe when I question myself, Michael, what was the difference? Why this guy got 5 and the Lifebook process got 12? And I'm like, oh, those other 7 are more related to society, human development, the experience of being human, not only the animal experience of being alive, and we need to take care of our physical body. And perhaps even animals, they might benefit from certain practice that we would call spiritual. I don't know, they might have spiritual layers to them, levels of consciousness, like trees and mushrooms have levels of consciousness, and we just don't understand how. It's a mushroom.
And there's all different variations of this idea of the wheel of life, the different areas and categories of our life to look at. Definitely something that's brought about in the psychological community with psychologists as well as in coaching. So then it doesn't feel so overwhelming having so many different areas of your life to balance. A lot what I took from the Lifebook process was what you said of, when we break this down into smaller pieces, do we know where we want to be? We know the steps we need to take, and knowing that we can actually keep that on our calendar to live intentionally towards those things. Because the whole goal around that is to be the best version of ourselves and start moving towards the actions that it's going to take in order to create that in our lives. How I tend to put that is intentional living, making and taking intentional steps to lead your best life Now, this isn't about you leading my best life and my definition of it. It really is this open framework for you to define what that is. As I said, even in the love relationship, is that, are you in a monogamous relationship, or are you in a polyamorous relationship? That's for you to decide on what those relationships look like, not for anybody else to determine for you. Same thing is true for finances. Some people want to have $1 million in the bank and that's their goal, and others want to live more modestly. There isn't a judgment in this structure. It's, what do you want? Why do you want it? What are your beliefs that are going to allow you to get there? And what are the steps you need to take in order to accomplish it? So I just wanted to start off this year of having you start thinking about, what are the areas of your life that are you winning in? Which areas of your life are you amazed by and fulfilled by? And what are the areas that you're not? What are the areas that you could use a little work? Because for me personally is, if I have an amazing love relationship, but I'm broke all the time, that doesn't work for me. If I'm in the best physical shape that I'm in, but I hate my job, that's also not a place where I want to be. Now, if I can be the most spiritual person on the planet, but no one wants to spend time with me, same thing. I personally am a very social creature, but I also need my time alone. So I've got that defined in the structure that I've built for myself of, this is when and how I connect with other people. And this is when I'm in my spiritual practices and what that looks like. And it's made a world of difference for me over the last 4 years now. That's coming up on 4 years. And so much so that I went and became certified as a Lifebook leader to help others, if they want help and support in creating this in their life, that I can actually help be a guide in that process, because it has been so effective for me. And not only that, but I know for me that I stuttered a couple of times and stopped in the middle of creating this for myself. That's why I wanted to be a Lifebook leader in this, is the accountability that comes with working with someone, because you go through 2 categories of this a week, and being held accountable to complete that, at least for your first draft on this. If I probably would have completed it on time, if I had someone else there to hold me accountable, to actually help review it with me and support me and give me some feedback on what I've done already. So that's one thing that now I've actually had one cohort go through that with me, and I was amazed at what they created. It was awesome watching them go through that process. I've got another person who's about halfway through, a little more than halfway at this point. So excited to see what comes next with the more and more people who are using a structure like this to help create their life. And I'm not sure, the people who are in the Mind Valley community probably know this, but one of the people that I'm aware of that's the most famous that has a life book is Lisa Nichols. She's actually the author of Speak and Inspire on the Mind Valley platform. And one of the stories I had heard her talk about is she moved, I believe, from California to the East Coast. And when she left, she had all of her stuff packed up into a moving truck, but she had her life book in the front seat of the car with her, because it was her most prized possession. Because that was actually her book that actually she's still writing to this point to live the most amazing version of her life, but also her guidebook on what are the recipes to create what she wants in her life. So I want to see more people with that level of clarity on who they want to be and why they want to be that.
And for those of you that do not know, that big black book behind Michael is his life book. He's showing to us now, but you need to speak, Michael, for the camera.
Your life book can be as short or as long as you want it to be. Mine's about 80 pages right now, the printed version of it. But as Bruno mentioned earlier, he introduced me to Notion as a tool that I then took it in my completely own direction and took all the stuff that's in here and put it into Notion and made it into a living document, something that I relate to on a regular basis, at least once a day, that I go in there and I'm actually interacting with that information to look something up, to actually leave a journal entry, to leave a note for myself of this worked or this didn't, I had a conversation with this person, I learned that from them, and I apply that then to my categories. All of my journal entries are intended to impact one of those areas of life that we talked about, those lifebook categories, and turn it into a structure and a framework to live my life intentionally by.
The way I would do it, it would be probably the reverse. I would probably start with the Notion thing in my journal, and then things would reach a state where they would end up into my life book.
It's possible, depends on if you want to live reactively or proactively.
Now you challenge me, Michael. It's not about that, Michael, because my journal entry, it has several purposes, my journal database. Like I created a content today and it was about a journal entry. So I'm using it in a way where everything that I need to produce will eventually be tied up to my journal. So some entries, they would reach, like for example, this entry of today, it also influenced my 3MIQ, because I realized that there is a challenge here that is friction to start to produce content. I need to set up an environment, and my environment is not actually the best productive one. So if I can grow in order to change my environment in a way where, like you, producing content is getting to a station and this station is ready, and I just need to get into a room and boom, I'm producing content. And that would be awesome. It would reduce friction. So this journal entry, it became a content, and it also became a growth entry into my 3MIQ. And I'm learning the Lifebook process in order to get these entries from the 3MIQ, and then some entries will get into my Lifebook. You know, so that would create from Notion the Lifebook, and the Lifebook would be a version more like a window, a prop, a physical prop to access that information that was published from Notion.
I hear you. And I like the fact that we have different approaches to get to the same result. So for me, it's that I've set up the framework first, and I'm now adding to the framework. You've got lots of pieces that you're then going to apply into your framework. And I think it's another perspective that allows us to grow together as we're creating new things in the world, and we're helping support other people in the world to live the best version of their life.
I agree, Michael. And and this is a level of, let's say, it's levels of learning. We have the unconscious levels of learning where we have 4 stages. I don't want to go too deep into this, but it is like unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. And this also relates with like you learning an information enough to recognize it, then learning an information well enough to be familiar with it, and then learning an information enough to be proficient with it. You can produce predictable results, and then you're learning an information well enough to be have mastery over it and actually tweak things and change things into that. So when we study things, we don't need to become a master. But when it's Jim Rohn say that the focus of all this is that don't be a follower, be a student. Learn the Lifebook process, go through it with Michael. But it's always good when we learn that process to see how would we do it, how would I do in my experience, how would this information better benefit me in my experience.
And not but, and
yes,
you get to then turn it into the next version for you. I agree. So you use one of my favorite words to not use in a sentence, which is but. This is something to learn, yes. And one of my teachers that I really appreciate talks about those same levels of consciousness, the unconscious competence up through unconscious competence. And for him, he's defined the layer above that, which is mastery, which when you look at the word in Japanese for master, it's the same as teacher. It's when you can then take what you've learned and teach it to someone else, which is a whole new layer of competence. When you learn something well enough, you can break it down into smaller pieces for other people to learn your process. So some people call that a teacher, an instructor, a professor, or a life coach, or a psychologist, or a therapist. Each of those people can then take their lessons and teach it to others.
Or a Lifebook outfitter.
Or a
Yeah,
life vision outfitter, yes. So I do,
right.
it's a matter of taking it to the next level. And there are, I believe that each of us can take at least one thing in our life, one skill, one gift, one talent, and get to the level of mastery where we are teaching other people how to do something similar in their own way. And for me, that gift that I'm hoping to bring to other people's is the idea of being able to look at things from a different perspective. The not always is that roadblock right in front of you. Does it have to be right in front of you? Sometimes it's taking a step to one side and you now see things from a completely different perspective. And I think that each of us has that thing in our life that we are here to bring at least one lesson to other people. It's one way that I love to be of service, is to teach some of those words to other people. Some of my most proud moments are whenever I hear my words coming out of my daughter's mouth, because she's now heard it enough, she's repeating it back to me, especially whenever I needed to hear it in that moment.
Good. Yeah. I hope those are good words. If you believe that you needed to hear that, they are probably good words, good wise words. Yeah. But I would love, but not, because but is not a nice word. Michael, I would love to understand better this process. Like you say that there is an order in which the categories are quoted. Can you talk about this order?
Yeah, so with Lifebook, which they have up on their website, and you can certainly go and look at the different categories that are up there, and we'll provide a link to that too. But the first 5 categories are there because it is our own personal journey. It's those things that we do put in many ways in solitude. Our health and fitness, yes, we can work with a trainer in order to get better at our health. We can work with a nutritionist. They can provide knowledge on what to be eating and how to be eating and when to be eating it. But it really is our choices that actually make a difference there. It's how we are expanding our character. Are we actually self-sabotaging more often than we're actually supporting ourselves? Those first 5 of health and fitness, intellectual, emotional, character, and spiritual, is about our own personal journey, discovering who we are underneath the layers of what society and family have actually projected onto us, and discovering what those areas are so we can then bring the best version of us out to the world. Then we really look at, once we've discovered ourselves and discovered the steps we need to take in order to get to the level of emotional health that we want, as an example, then it is, how do we then use that to relate to a life partner, to life partners, the people that we are romantically involved with? And what does that look
Before we
like?
go into that, I would like to remark, Michael, that these first 5 categories that you mentioned, the areas, they are spiritual, physical, intellectual, that's actually, they are health and fitness, intellectual, emotional, character, and spiritual. They are very similar. They just differ in one from the ones that the Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar mentioned as SPIRE, which were the ones I was reading, which is spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional. They differ in character. He adds relationships, and I believe in his talks, it is both love relationship and community relationship, but he takes out the character. Yeah. And I like the fact that you mentioned that they are in kind of an inner journey. That is this aspect of it is all spiritual somehow. And there is this exercise of mindfulness. That's what I believe I was looking for. It's an exercise of mindfulness because it's looking inwards and trying to adopt different perspectives. And that might be the reason why you value so much this role that you have of Lifebook Outfitter, where you put the different perspective and you help people giving this different perspective. Because in my experience, I don't know other people's experience, but in my experience, it has been a hard lesson to learn how to change my perspective and actually see even myself, particularly myself, from other points of view. And it's always a challenge.
They call these blind spots for a reason. And that's where having a community around us that we trust, that are going to give us quality feedback, is really important. And if it is your inner circle of people, like we talk about in Mastering Authentic Networking, if it is that inner circle, or if it is a professional who is there trained in order to work through that, I think it can make a world of difference as we are looking to create this next best version of our lives. But it is that inner journey first that we have to go, because everything I believe that everything on the outside is a reflection of what's going on the inside. If there's chaos going on around the outside, it tends to be because it's coming from in here. And it's one of my favorite sayings was when I was on the men's team is, when you look out there, it's not a window, it's a mirror of what's going on inside. And that is, how we relate to things. It is.
I do believe that we can experience some storms. Like I don't remember, I believe it's a video from Jim Rohn. I'm certain it is a video from Jim Rohn. I don't remember what he's talking about. But Jim Rohn, he had some interesting talks. I love when he talks about the sower, like the parable of the sower, and he relates that to productivity, to business, and things like that. But in this talk, he mentioned, like, he's talking about the parable of the sower, but he's adding things to it. And by the end, he remembers to add that sometimes the storms come. And the sower, he did everything right. He didn't care for the birds. He didn't went chasing them. He took care of the soil. He continued sowing. He took care of his seed and everything. He goes out throughout the process. And a day before of the harvest comes the storm and puts all his harvest to waste. And he loses everything. It can happen. But usually I do agree, it's the way things are going inside that manifest the outside. Sometimes there are events that happen and they might be cataclysmic, but even those events where, as we spoke in self-sabotage, they can be being sown themselves and they achieve a level where they are inevitable. Because as Jim Rohn said again, Jim Rohn marking like a lot of ideas from him right now. Success is nothing more than a series of good decisions in judgment. I don't remember exactly, but it's something like that repeated over time. And failure is nothing more but a few errors in judgment. Success is nothing more but a few disciplines repeated over time, and failure is nothing more but a few errors in judgment repeated over time. Yes. I like as well, Michael, before we move on to this, how you mentioned that everything that we prepare for ourselves, then we project somehow. You mentioned this differently, but then we project somehow in our love relationship. I don't like to forget, many people like to overlook that, but I don't like to forget that the sexual desire, the need to reproduce, is a deep desire that is within all of us, because it is related to the continuous survival of our collective being, the humanity. It's the biggest dopamine, things like that, hormones, things related to drive we can have, is related to our need to find a sexual partner and reproduce with them, continuing our survival beyond ourselves.
Absolutely. And that really is a huge amount of the creative energies that we have in us. I know that they talk a lot about that in Think and Grow Rich as well, is tapping into that creation energy to be creative is a huge aspect of this. And to me, that's one reason why the love relationship is the first one of the relationships that you focus on. It, for me, is one of the cornerstones of who I am, is who I'm choosing as my partner, who I'm actually sharing my life with, who I'm trusting with my failures and celebrating my wins with, and very much related to all the other components. But for me, I've got to get those other categories under wraps before I'm qualified to bring myself into that relationship. And my partner now very much helps support me in those challenges that I have. And When I've been going through my annual review for the last week or so, and that's the area where I think that I've hit the mark most often. That's where I feel like I'm succeeding the most. This past year, I got married, and I'm so excited that we were able to do that and have close family here for that. But that's
Congratulations, Michael.
Thank you. And that's then is the first of the relationships. I know that the doctor's SPIRE structure is relationships as a whole, but each one of those relationships to me has a different flavor, has a different result I want to create. My love partner is the one who I'm spending the most time with. And then next would then be our kids. So I've got a daughter biologically, and she's got 3 children of her own. And we very much enjoy the time that we get to spend with them. So the Christmas holidays were fantastic because we got a chance to have everybody under the same roof at the same time, be able to share that time with them. And then we were able to then go into that third type of relationship, which is who are the other people that you're interacting with in the world on a social level. Now, this isn't necessarily about who you are networking with, who you are spending time with in a professional capacity, but it's certainly, there is a fair amount of overlap for me on those people that I enjoy spending time with are the ones that I also want to do business with. So
Those are good type of relationships, right? Productive relationships. I look forward to the day where the people that I'm hanging the most with are the people that I'm doing business with. That's awesome. I talk with my friends like, hey, we don't need to be getting out with people that are like, when we are at the bar, for example, and we talk about the future, they get anxious and they get upset and they're like, hey, no, let's talk about the game of yesterday or something like that. Or let's talk about that person we all don't like, and we triangulate that person and feel better and strengthen our bonds between ourselves. About triangulation, right, Michael? We can talk about triangulation. It's a great illness in society. It's a good topic for us and very useful because it's an information that it's easily communicated. We all recognize it. And when we get it, we can apply in our lives. But let's talk with people. Let's hang out with people that even though we are in the bar, even though we are watching a game, we are having conversations that are about the future, about the things we are creating, about everything that we could produce together. And instead of acting as a lone force in the world, a lone presence that can produce that much, we do what the Mind Valley community calls co-creation, what I like to call emergence, which is the emergence. It's a beehive. It's a colony of beings that are producing. I like to see companies as emergences, as colonies of beings that increase the production that we have somehow. I like very much this idea of all things culminating in relationship because I mentioned before, I don't know, I had the experience to share an apartment with a friend that was also a business partner, and it ended up in catastrophe because it was terrible. Everything with what is the routine? Not the routine. The relationship was like problematic. But I do remember that what was I actually going to mention? Oh, but I do remember that one day we were business planning and we created a mind map for all the projects that we could be putting action towards and increase our income streams. And one of them that he pointed out was a book that I could write a book about relationship and approaching women and things like that. And then I started writing this book, Michael. And before I realized, I noticed that the book had nothing to do with relationship and approaching women. It had to do with a personal journey inside. In order for us to recognize some things like how to deal with rejection, how to not taking things personally, how to be interesting and not taking things for granted, seeing the other person as a different perspective of the world. We have our inner representation of the world, and then the other person has their own inner representation of the world. Understanding that people come with baggage and that we might trigger things that are not important to us, but then they trigger some baggage that the person might have. And the person might then reject us, and this is not related to us, like all things tying together, and it's more like an inner way, an inner work, a mindfulness work. It's a transcendency work. And it's interesting that you say that the first 5 areas are focused on that journey, and then they bring to relationship, which is very important. And yes.
So, and I think that each of those relationships is one of the things that I really like about some of the stuff that Charlie Morley talks about. And I know that we've touched on this before around the whole idea of shadow, both the golden and the dark shadow. And what we actually dislike about others tends to be the things that we dislike about ourselves. That's that dark shadow material. When we see someone acting the way that we used to act, someone who's actually doing things that we dislike about ourselves. And similarly, it's the other thing around the golden shadow, as we admire people that are exhibiting the things that we actually hide maybe from the world, but really is that inner light, that huge lesson, that positive golden aspect of our being. We wouldn't be able to recognize it or connect with it unless it was already within us to begin with. So we do then, that's why those first 5 categories for me are so key to taking into our relationships. Because then it's okay, we are going to be surrounding ourselves with people who are going to support us to where we want to grow. And if you're in a relationship right now that isn't, then maybe it's time to look at that.
And another thing that caught my attention was the fact that you mentioned the levels of a relationship, something like that. And that information made me remember from the book, The Power of Habit, that then talks about strong bonds and weak bonds in society. That we have our peers, the people that care for us, the people that have a personal relationship with us, and then we have society, the community, the wider people, that we are connected somehow, culturally, perhaps through our heritage, but then we have this connection, and they care, they understand, they identify with us, and depending on the level of consciousness of the person, might identify with a wider group of people, but then they don't actually know us. But they talk about it in the movements, while the social movements, I don't remember the name, it's not in my culture, but it's, I believe it's the civil rights movements, the one that were led by Martin Luther King. And then he talks about those movements and how the strength of the strong bonds of the people that were involved, that the Rosa Parks, I believe, the woman that didn't want to go out of the bus, and of the Dr. Martin Luther King that had a role in the community. They were active people that they engage and benefit the community. And then there were a lot of people that had strong bonds with them. And that led to enough people following that cause, so that the wilder community that had weak bonds started to reach so many people that effect what I mentioned. There are more people that identify with wider communities. Then it reached so many communities that it became a national thing, I believe. It was a national movement.
Absolutely. It very much was a national movement. And it took, yes, someone having the original idea, and his I Have a Dream speech was one of the things that's the most memorable here in the United States around that movement.
He
It was,
communicated the vision. He communicated the vision.
he did. Absolutely. And he enrolled and influenced people in order to follow him into standing up for those rights. Something that many people these days wouldn't do because of their own inner fears. And it's one of the reasons why I admire him for all that he did around that and changed the way that we actually see the world. And it's still a growth journey that here in the US as well as across the world we're still struggling with. This idea that, you know, you've mentioned the concept of the collective being of humanity. If we consider the earth being one cell in a giant organism called the universe, then really are we that different from each other? So we have more in common than we have different. Yet there's so much polarity between people right now, between the left and the right, the white and the black, the green and the blue, the taller, the short, the healthy, the unhealthy, to have this discernment between people. And a lot of it I get, but I know, at least for me, I want the best for my kids. I think that you'll find most parents on the planet want the best for their kids. They may have a different approach to getting there. And that idea of everyone has their own approach is really why this Lifebook framework is set up the way it is. It's not, you have to be an athlete and you need to be a genius and you need to be a stoic and you actually need to be reliable and you need to be a particular faith. It's, what do you want to be? Do you want to stand up like Martin Luther King Jr. and start a movement for people who have been downtrodden and made less than for their entire lives for the last several hundred years or several thousand years, depending on how far back in history you want to go? Or are you going to, stick with the status quo? If you're going to just put your head down and do your work, there is no judgment on which route you're going to go. There isn't. It's an opportunity to choose.
And there's also things that it's interest to me, because when we talk about the example we just gave of the civil rights movement, they put the resources that they had together. And you mentioned as well that the next categories, they have an order. And like love, relationship, and parenting, it's very much taking care of the ones that are close to us, of the close bonds that we have. And I do believe that we need to widen that. Of course, we need to take care of the ones that are our personal responsibility. But I do believe that we need to take a look at society, human society, as ourselves, as a single organism that is sick and needs care and attention. There are people in the world today very much, some much more than others, some in much obvious ways than others. And there is all kind of wrong things going on, like corruption, there is segregation, there is racism, there is a lot of things, even crime and things like that. We should take a personal responsibility in all that. I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot, but not saying to anybody, go become Batman. Don't go become Batman. Just take a personal responsibility. Let's think about that and see how we can do things towards that. And more than that, how we can become like this, how we can create together that co-creation idea, that emergence idea of putting structures together that produce more companies. They produce so much more. The potential of production of a company is so much bigger than of the individual. We should create more companies, develop more technology, things like that. And I also like, Michael, you have something to mention about that, because I heard a click.
So the thing I want to make sure that we are aware of here is I agree with you that as we look to make a deeper impact in the world is when we're actually expanding to our society. That really is our social relationships. It's going to start then with our family and doing the best we can here. But there's a reason why we start in the first 5 categories of self-actualizing, getting ourselves to the best state that we can, so we can then take the lessons we've learned and share it with other people. And I agree that there is this idea of becoming a movement and doing that through organizations, through companies who can get there. It doesn't, in my experience, that doesn't work if this part isn't under control yet. If I'm not taking care of my stuff, then that movement doesn't work. It doesn't actually get there. And that's once again, that's where we're looking at all of these different areas of life, rather than just saying health and fitness is the most important, because it's one aspect. Our career is one aspect. Our relationship with our partner is one aspect. And me personally, I want to be 12 category smart, as they call in the Lifebook community, is making sure that I'm actually hitting 9 out of 10 on all of those categories, and in the way that I actually see me reaching that. And it is the idea of being self-actualized that is actually this result, if you will, of being the best version of me, so I can be an example for others. One of the people I was talking to this past week comes from a much more Eastern traditional mindset of the collective is more important than the single person. And I respect the fact that is his perspective. And it is one way to approach this. The hive mind, you have another word that you use for that, is we actually become a larger entity when we're all working together. I believe is, yes, a possible result, a possible path that we can go on. For me personally, I know that I'm not in a place to tell anybody how to do something. I feel like I'm in a place where I can help someone see where they can take themselves to the next place. I'm not going to should on people. That's one of my taboo words, is you should do something. No, you can actually do this and get this result. You can do this and get this result. Which result do you want? Because if I want to be 500 pounds, I can go eat 5 cheeseburgers. I should eat better, maybe, but if that's not my result that I'm looking for, then it doesn't matter. If that wasn't a result I was aiming for. So for me, should is one of those words up there with try and but that give me the heebie-jeebies.
Did I use should, Michael? I don't remember. Yeah. No, okay, it's okay. I don't remember exactly where it was. The idea that I wish to take from something that you say somewhere, and I think it's very important, is that it's about the emergence. You ask about the word, it's emergence, but it's not exactly that. It's like there are things in life that they are laws of the universe. There are laws in the universe. And these laws, they happen. We can change that. Like I'll mention something, I'll make an analogy first, but I do believe I wish to talk about the law of patterns or something like that. The law of emergence is related to, like emergence is related to the law of patterns. And this is something conscious in some things, some areas, and unconscious in some areas. But here's the analogy. Jim Rohn as well. Jim Rohn is very useful today. He used this analogy, which is amazing. Imagine, Michael, that there are these huge planes, like this huge planes in front of you. And in these planes, there is this huge rock. It's a rock that is like a kilometer wide, like it's huge, tons and tons of rock. And every day at noon, midday, the rock just magically rises up to the sky and it stays there. You see the rock very tiny in the sky. And then at midnight every day, let's say that's not too tiny so we can watch the rock falling. Let's say that it's like a kilometer high or something like that. And then from some distance in these beautiful plains, we can see the rock at midnight. It just, let's make it the contrary. It rises up at night, and then at the day, midday, it falls, so we can watch it falling beautifully. And every day it does that, poof, and it's a spectacle. If in your reality this happens, it's something that it's there, you go there and you see it. You might question yourself, like, why does this happen? Why does this happen? And you might say whatever you want. It's this, it's that, I don't like it, and it's your reality. You don't need to understand why that happened and to make sense of it, to be sure not to be under the rock at midday, right? You just won't be there. You won't be there. This is the thing that we need to get. And the emergence is like patterns. We are patterns, like atoms form molecules that form cells, that form organs, that form systems, that forms ourselves, that form humanity, and there goes. And here we go, being part of the universe, having the opportunity, or it's the universe having the opportunity to experience itself. And emergencies, they just happen. We are emergence. Our community, they happen. Whatever we do together as society, it has an effect on Earth. The thing is that this effect is widely unconscious. It is something that happens in an emergency. We don't plan with our neighborhood exactly what we are producing. If our government, the mayor is not a good mayor, is not planning well, or if we are in a corrupt country, we don't plan very well what is happening. And then we have open air sewers in many countries. We have people that are experiencing lots and lots of diseases. And the idea that when I mention emergence is that let's not forget that inevitably, if we have the intention or not, we are producing some result from the collective existence that we have together, and that we need to think about that and organize it. I don't know. I'm sure that some places they have a better way. Where you live, there might be some interesting ways to assess these situations, and I'm just not aware of. But I do know that in my reality, this is widely ignored, and it's mostly an unconscious process. And like plastic, for example, this is something that is widely unconscious of ourselves. We do know that it's not good, yet we do it. We engage with plastic every day, unconsciously. Like unconsciously, not that it's subconscious, automatic, in an unconscious way. We don't consider the consequences. We are just do it. Yeah.
Getting back
So
to the 12 areas of our life that we're focusing on this time, but really,
yeah,
this is bringing light into these other areas of our life. And it's stereotypically, in most cultures, it tends to be men focus on career and finance and health and fitness, perhaps. Women tend to focus on, stereotypically, their love relationship and their parenting, their kids. And there's certainly people who do spread out, and then some of these other aspects of life are much more important for them. And then there's areas that different genders tend to be more weak with. Men have a difficulty many times approaching their emotional life. I think primarily because culture has determined that we as men really only have two emotions that are condoned, maybe not accepted, to express, which are fear and anger. Men tend to have much more difficulty really doing a deep dive in the emotional category. And I've seen this over and over again already, had to challenge myself with that.
and this is a
And
culture that we need to change as well. Like
maybe,
men have access to all the emotions that all human beings have, and women's, they do tend to focus on parenting, things like that, and we men focus on career. But this is cultural learning. I do believe that this is taught. It's a focus that is directed. Of course, there is aptitudes, like we might be more drive to get things, for example, go after things, and women might be more driven to nurture things, but it's different.
I even had a conversation with someone recently of, as much as I just said stereotypically men, I'm going to actually
Yeah.
shift that and actually say it tends to be a more masculine approach, is to go and get things. And a more feminine approach is to nurture things. A masculine approach really is hyper focus, get this one thing done from a masculine approach. Feminine tends to be, I need to have a wide field of vision to make sure that the whole tribe, the whole community is taken care of. I think each of us can nurture different aspects of ourselves in that. And this process is a way for us to really see how each of those show up for us. Do I want to become more feminine? That's not really my focus right now. My focus right now is to hone my skills more on the masculine side, because I've done a lot of work on the feminine side, and I want to be more directive, because that's where I feel like I need to grow. And I think that there's an opportunity for each of us to, as I asked at the beginning, is looking across the spectrum of these areas of your life, is of those categories of health and fitness, intellectual, emotional, character, spiritual, love relationship, parenting, social relationships, finance, career, quality of life, which of those are humming, which of those are actually doing fantastically well on a schedule, part of the discipline, and doing great, and which are the ones that need a little more TLC, which are the ones that need a little more work, a little more focus, maybe some more research, maybe asking for some more help.
What is TLC, Michael?
Tender, loving care.
And this is from, is this usual in the USA or is it from Lifebook?
No, it's an American acronym of tender, loving care. A little more focus, a little more directed toward, a little more compassion, maybe a little forgiveness, and really giving it some energy and some time. It's a necessary thing that, as I mentioned before, is if I'm doing really well over here, but the rest of my life sucks, do I have someone to share my celebrations with? My brain is so big, but my body can't carry my head around because I've done all this intellectual work, but I've neglected my body. It's a matter of finding the right balance for you and determine what does a 10 look like. And then is that where you want to be? Is that where you're heading towards? And what steps do you need to take in order to get there?
I like that there are like 5 categories for us to look inwards to ourselves, 3 that relate to our relationships, which is very important. And then there are 2 that are related to resources. You spoke about how men are more focused on these areas. And it's very interesting because it's like, it's very masculine energy to provide. We have this in a lot of animals. Some animals, they have it otherwise, like they provide different things, like the lioness, they provide for food. So they go after there and fetch some things. But the males, they provide security and they protect the cubs from other males, from other animals, the females from hyenas that could overpower them. And that's a lot of things there. The career, and it's very good. And there is also an aspect there I don't see on the 12 categories, Michael, but I do remember that you mentioned before that after focusing on resources, like there is those steps. I focus on the self, focus on the relationships, focus on resources that we have to do or whatever we wish to do in life. And then there was a focus on contribution. Is there a specific area for this, or is this more like something that you do in all the areas?
It's funny that you asked that because they've talked about putting in another category, and there's been some talk about contribution being part of that. Me personally, that falls under the category of career because it is what I'm actually being, what value I'm giving to the world as a contribution. And then many times that does have it has value being returned. So for me,
Michael,
it's
that was such a mind blow for me right now. Of course it is career, bro, because business is solving problems and challenges. Awesome, amazing.
and not always does that need to be something that you're compensated in a financial way for. So contribution definitely falls under career in my mind, is how are you helping impact the world? And hopefully, if you are a janitor, be the best freaking janitor you can possibly be. If you're a lawyer, be the best lawyer you can be and bring your values and your character to that. I don't care if you're making $5 an hour, if you're making $5 a month or $5 million a year. How are you contributing to the society around you? What value are you bringing to you and the people you care about in your community? That to me is all about career, and why to me it's separate from finance. Because you can make $1 million a year, but if you spend $5 million a year, you still don't have any money. So it's a matter of finding the balance for that. Is the idea of finances is the how are you, what is your relationship with currency, and what is currency? It's the value we put into something. It is an exchange vehicle in order to, so I don't have to then go and raise goats in order for me to actually get goat's milk, and I need to become a mechanic so I can actually keep my car on the road, and I need to be good at computers so I can keep my computers working. And so that there is a common exchange amongst us, and what you do with it, where you invest it, how do you save it, how do you budget, and determine what a budget looks like for you, being different than your contribution to the world.
And that's so interesting, Michael, because this for me takes the Lifebook process to a whole new level of comprehension, of appreciation. Because if the person really goes both feet into the Lifebook process and really learn this process and apply it in their lives, this can be greatly beneficial. This can be life-changing. This can be extremely transformational. And if we spread this culture towards a scenario where there are several people, at least the early adopters, the leaders, they're out there. You mentioned Lisa Nicholson from the Mind Valley community, and she's an author there. But everybody on the Mind, not but and everybody on the Mind Valley community has their life book. I do know this about their culture. And every employer of the Mind Valley enterprise, the company, they go through the Lifebook process. And it's a necessity. It's a process that they do in their culture. And this is another insight, very valuable. Our culture is whatever we wish it to be. So if I have a company and I say that to work in this company, a person needs to create a life book So they have purpose. How you mentioned that as well, Michael, and I was thinking about talking about it and forgot. But here's the thing: if the person doesn't have a purpose, doesn't know how to deal with purpose in their own lives, how can they be part of a purpose on from another entity? They could, but wouldn't that be a supporting role? It's a supporting role. Don't choose a supporting role for yourself. Do the same thing, do the same work, have the same importance for the company, but have your main role in your life. Design, plan, and well structured. Know your character. Know what is it that you stand for and all those things. Because we can be the leading role of our own lives, even if we are participating into another entity, into this beehive, a company, and helping them with their purpose. This purpose must be aligned with our purpose, because then we will be fulfilled and all things like that. And that's great. It takes the Lifebook exercise to another level. Do you wish to say something, Michael?
Some people are intended to be in a supporting role. I understand that in your own life, being the lead role in your own world, I totally am behind that. What I'm also going to say is that there are some people who feel better when they're following somebody else's vision, somebody else's purpose. And maybe that's until they find their own. But once again, even from the place of a life coach, a life vision outfitter, a life book leader, any of those titles you want to give, I'm never going to tell somebody personally, you need to be the leader in your life. I want to work with leaders. I want to work with people who have picked an area that they're going to lead in their life. But at the same time, I'm going to honor your journey if that's not where you're at. For the longest time, I've been the person who's the person behind the curtain rather than the person that's out on stage. And I was very happy being in that space. And now at this point in my life, I'm ready to take a step forward out onto stage and say, this is what I've learned from behind the curtain. I think there's value with wherever you stand in this production that we call life. If it's on stage, if it's behind the lights, if it's in the pit with the music, if it's the costumer or the makeup artist, or the person who built the sets and is long gone by now, I think each of those people provides a very valuable role. Same thing as in the hive mindset. There is one queen in a hive. That's it. And you have your workers and you have your attendees. Discover what your role is and then do that to the best of your ability is really what is the experience that I've actually thrived through the most, is discovering what my role is. And sometimes that may upset the people around me because they've already put me in a different role than where I feel I can truly give value.
I think it's more related to knowing your role. And there are a few movies, a few plays where the queens and kings are the main protagonists. Like there's usually the worker, but they have the leading role. They understand that they have a role to do in the community. It's exactly what we are talking about Lifebook here. We have a role in the community, but we also have a role for our family. We also have a role for our peers, our role in humanity. We have a role with ourselves. And yeah, understanding that despite being supportive, being support role, having your support role elsewhere, because we are all part of something. Not everybody is the leader. Not everybody is stating the vision. It's more be conscious of our role and not to fall into the claws of people that are abusive and exploratory, because that happens a lot. My mother, for example, she was deeply entangled with Universal Church, which they take money for everything, Michael. It's everything. They sell water that is blessed on the Jordan River. She brought water from the Jordan River to home so I could drink and have a healthier life. Things like that. I also like, Michael, that we then talk to, there are two other categories that we talked about 10. There are two others that are perhaps like the most like interesting to me, which is quality of life and life vision. And then we talk about this relates so much with the 3MIQ exercise. I like it. I like this relationship because I like to use things that stack together, that strengthen each other. Instead of, oh, I either use this or I use that, I can use both. And the quality of life, it's so important to have a consciousness, to plan, to prepare, to grow related to our quality of life and improve it. And it's the experiences that we have. And the 3MAQ is experiences and contribution. We mentioned all those going through the 12 categories, not in this order, but we mentioned all those. And then there is the last, yes.
And it's interesting because the exercise of the 3 most important questions starts with the experiences you want to have, and then goes in what growth you need to go through in order to have those experiences. And once you've been through that growth, how are you going to then contribute to the world? And Lifebook is the reverse, is once you've gone through all of this deep dive and this discovery in yourself, is then what experiences do you want to have? What does your environment look like that's around you? And then what are those things that you have in your life that actually bring you joy? Like for some, it's they want a motorcycle because they want to have the wind in their hair and they want to go riding all over the countryside. And for others, it's a bicycle because they actually want, that's where they're going to invest their money into. And once again, this is one of those categories where what's valuable to me, what's a quality in my life is different than the person standing next to me that is different for you. I don't need expensive cologne. That's not something I put a lot of money into. I don't need a car that's actually brand new for this year and actually cost me $75,000 to buy. That's not where I invest my time, my energy, and my money. I'm more of a gadget person. I like toys and tools in that way. I've got a computer that I've invested money into and a new phone. So that's where I invest in for the quality of my life, because it also makes my life easier when those things work well. I'm more the tech geek side of things, and that's what I appreciate. Each person once again, it's a matter of discovering what those experiences that you want to have. If you want to jump out of a perfectly good airplane, go for it. I'm not going to be jumping out behind you. That's not where I want to go. But if it's me putting on a life vest and going down white water rafting somewhere, that is something I want to experience. And it's not for everyone. That's one place that I want to be. I want to be able to ride on horseback again. That's an experience that I'm working towards. In order for me to do that, I've got to get my finances in better order, and I need to get my physical health in better order. So they do actually compound and stack towards each other. Because once I get the work done in those other areas, I can then afford to do those things in my quality of life. Getting my house in order to be a representation of what's going on here is also that environment that we have around us. It's another key aspect of this. And
it's interesting that the experiences part goes also as in all the categories, not only quality of life, right? It goes in all the categories. Both the experience, the growth, contribution, like they all go through there.
There is a similar thread. It's something they talk about in the book by Alan Watts as well, is in many ways we are artificially separating out these aspects of our life. We're pulling our physical body away from our intellectual body, away from our emotional body, away from our spiritual self. But it's all aspects of who we are. There still is the Michael, whatever that entity is, that is equipped in all this. So yes, there's going to be a lot of overlap as those experiences I may want to have with my love partner. I want to may have them with my wife. I may want to have them with friends or with my children, or maybe all of them, or maybe it's by myself. And that's another reason why it's actually set apart, because it can include those other people in that. And it may be an emotional experience, and it may be a spiritual experience. And those experiences can be things that are done near home or far away. I know for the founders of Lifebook, John and Missy Butcher, they did their travel stint. They actually went all over the world and lived all places on every single continent on the planet. And now that's not what they're looking to do. Their experiences are now be at home. Their quality of life is about what they do in their environment. That's the stage that they're at. And I respect the fact that's where they're at, because they've done the work over here to get to a place where they can now be here for this chapter.
Mm-hmm. And tell me something, Michael, about the life vision thing. The whole life book is a life vision exercise. So where is the difference between the 11 categories and the life vision? areas, 11 areas, sorry, and the life vision area.
So life vision in many ways is the true end result you're aiming for. It's you've done this deep, intensive work around 11 areas of your life. Then the idea is that now if you then lay out the life vision category, that this is then the totality of what you're experiencing in your life, things you're doing, how you're doing them, who you're doing them with, and your feelings and thoughts and your physicality in that process. It's the culmination or the combined process of all those other 11 categories. It is stepping outside of those other individual pieces and putting them back together like a puzzle, and then seeing the golden thread that actually runs through all of it. It's a way to look at this from a 10,000 foot view now that we've actually, taken apart the individual pieces. In some ways, it's like saying, so what if we look at, as an example, a car? You have the body, the chassis, you have the engine, you have the stereo system. You got one person who specializes in the stereo system. They go deep and make that the best possible stereo system in that car as possible. You have another person that specializes in the body, in the outside form of it, so it looks nice as well as it's aerodynamic. We're still talking about a car. We're still talking about the experience of sitting behind the wheel and driving that from point A to point B. And that in many ways this is that vehicle that is your life. And if that is the things that you've accomplished, you can list it as that, or it could be, what does your ideal day look like? When you wake up through whenever you go to bed, what is that experience like? And each of those has such an amazing impact when you look at it. If I'm doing something that's physical, can I be, learning something at the same time? Yes. Can I feel a positive emotion while I'm working on my body? Yes. Can it be a spiritual process and a spiritual discipline? Yes. Can I do that with my partner, my friends, and my kids at the same time? Absolutely. Can I have one thing that's going to hit 7 categories at once? Absolutely. But it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be, but if you get that point of productivity, it's incredible, awesome. You're parenting, you are cultivating your relationships, you are getting closer to your loved one, and you're taking care of your health and your mind and all that. That's very good. And yeah, I would like that. It's a desirable.
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons, like one of the programs that I'm building now is this idea of going out with people in nature, climbing a mountain, learning about self and leadership. So it combines health and fitness. It combines career for me, a financial aspect to it because it's an investment of myself and people in me. It does impact my quality of life because it's an experience that I enjoy having. And if I can do that with my social relationship at the same time, and it's a spiritual process for me, that whenever I'm connecting with nature is part of my spiritual process. Whenever I can actually feel the energy of the universe because I'm away from the hustle and bustle of the big city. It's a way for me to express my character, resilience and persistence, and being ruthlessly compassionate and being a sacred listener all at once. And that's, to me, how I get into that place of flow, when I can actually be engaging various aspects of this entity, this collective being of who I am, relating to the collective being of other people.
There is another great value for the Lifebook process, which is when we align all those areas together. Even career is related to that, Michael, because now you can become the Lifebook outfitter and provide people with those experiences that they do not need to learn by themselves, which is a great journey on its own, because we need this. It's like a guide or something. It's culture. This relates with rituals and events. We should also talk, we know we shouldn't. We can also talk about rituals and events, like creating a daily journal entry. It's a ritual, but going to a mountain with your family and your peers and people from your community, providing a spiritual experience with all that compound effect, that's an event. And we need to design events. So this life vision is more about planning, putting together, optimization, working on designing these rituals and events that can help us improve our quality of life. I love the Lifebook process, Michael. I have a much bigger appreciation about it after this conversation of today. And that's very interesting. Thank you.
And like I said, this is us touching on this. And I want to talk about this at least once a month as we're moving forward in this year, because this is part of the foundation for how I've been able to create what I have in my life up to this point. And it's only getting better from here for me. That's the path that I'm on. Even with the challenges and the struggles and the potential failures and the lessons and the mistakes, it's still moving forward because I'm actually doing this intentionally. I'm doing these things on purpose. And it's one of the things that I said on one of the recent things that we are on is, and I found that there's a couple of quotes that are very similar to this too, is don't allow your failures to define you. Allow them to refine you. You get to determine what works for you and what doesn't, because you're taking action and learning by the result of what you create.
And remember the law of patterns. The same way we emerge, our actions, they are all following patterns as well. Sometimes our patterns, they repeat every day. We repeat something several times a day. Sometimes it takes a year for us to go climb that mountain again. But we can always take a look at our lives into patterns. There are events that they repeat take a long time to repeat, but they will repeat. And we can make so that those events are intentional. Like Michael mentioned, we work on our Lifebook, we join our community, and we spread this culture of living an intentional life. And yeah, that can lead, what incredible experiences can that lead, Michael? Can that lead to? Yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you, Bruno, for being on this path with me, this journey, and looking forward to as this year unfolds and we actually bring a little bit more of this out to the world. And if you want to know more about this information, we'll be linking to a page that has information about the Lifebook process. If it's something you want to start, it's the next cohort's going to be starting in March, because we just had one start here on January 6th of this year. But if you have some deeper interest in this, please reach out. Let's have a conversation. Let's see what works for you and see if this is a process that can help you elevate your life as well. My name is Michael of Elevate Your Best.
Thank you all for watching.
See you next week and have a great January. We look forward to sharing with you.